A man dies from what seem to be natural causes.
Hey, wake up! My husband's really sick. He got heat stroke yesterday, and now he's not waking up.
His condition continued to decline throughout the evening hours. He ultimately passed away.
At the time, it was felt that this was more a medical-related death.
But an autopsy reveals foul play.
When we got the tox screen back, the victim had a lethal dose of ethylene glycol in his system.
So ethylene glycol is mainly found in antifreeze and brake fluid.
In the garage, there was a beer bottle that was full of antifreeze.
I knew my dad didn't just pass away so easily like that.
But when investigators discover a family inheritance at stake, it leads them to a killer who'd do anything to keep it for themselves.
I was leaned over in the truck, and she come out with a big old knife and tried to stab me.
$17 million is a lot of money. I don't care who you are.
This all could have been prevented. He died over literally nothing.
On September 4th, 2023, police in Minot, North Dakota receive what appears to be a routine emergency call.
Our Minot Central Dispatch received a phone call from Kenoyer reporting that Stephen Riley was ill in their apartment.
My husband's really sick. He got heat stroke yesterday, and now he's not waking up. Hey, wake up! Come on, wake up!
She stated that he was lying on the floor and that he was breathing but abnormally, and she needed an ambulance.
I've got help on the way.
Officers and medical staff were all dispatched to their apartment to try to make contact and see what was going on.
61-year-old man was unconscious.
Is he in here?
Yeah, he's on the floor in here.
Is he alert?
Huh?
Is he alert?
No.
Is he breathing?
The apartment was very cluttered.
There was trash, piles of clothing. We had to just really step over, onto a bunch of things to kind of navigate through the apartment. They eventually come to the bedroom where they see Stephen Riley barely breathing.
Steve, can you hear me? Steve? Steve, can you hear me? Has he taken anything?
No. He drank beer yesterday. He was working on the truck.
Ina had mentioned to officers that she was trying to help Stephen by putting an ice compress on him to try to help cool him down from the heat stroke.
She said she tried to put him up on the bed and he fell off. Then that's when she decided to call for EMS.
By the time paramedics arrive, it's clear Stephen's condition is more serious than Ina thought.
He found him struggling to breathe, lying on the floor unresponsive.
His condition is very poor. They had to carry him out in a cot.
Stephen Riley.
Once he arrived to the hospital, they quickly realized that he needed a bed in the ICU. There were no beds available here, so he was flown down to Bismarck, North Dakota.
When they get there, Stephen is actually getting worse and goes into cardiac arrest several times. Doctors working on him constantly to bring him back to life.
He was in end organ failure. His body has just started shutting down.
Well, Stephen's condition continued to decline throughout the evening hours and the night hours into the morning hours of September 5th. Stephen ultimately passed away on September 5th at 8:32 in the morning.
My phone was blown up with messages and missed calls from some of my dad's friends. The doctors pronounced him dead over the phone to me. It was devastating. Felt like something was torn from you. So I just tried to stay as calm as I could and get the fastest flight over there.
Doctors are unable to give police a definitive cause of death, but they do find traces of drugs in Stephen's system.
He also tested positive for methamphetamines and had a known history of methamphetamine use prior to that. And at the time, it was felt that he likely suffered from a cardiac event complicated by the fact that he used methamphetamines.
There was nothing indicating that there was any kind of foul play or there was anything requiring law enforcement to get involved and begin an investigation.
But I knew my dad didn't just pass away so easily like that and so fast. I knew something was wrong and off from the start, and so I had requested an autopsy from the hospital. Shortly after that phone call with them, I had called the police station and tried to open a case for my dad. I just needed to figure out what was going on.
Stephen Riley was born August 25th, 1972 in Palm Springs, California. He was so premature, his parents weren't sure he would make it.
My brother was sort of a miracle baby. He was 4 pounds when he was born and made it into the newspaper for being so tiny.
Stephen not only survived, he thrived, eventually becoming the protective older brother of 2 sisters.
Having Stephen as an older brother, he was definitely in charge. He really looked after my sister and I, no matter what we did. He always made sure that we were safe. He was just that older brother that was very comforting in that way.
As Stephen grew older, he took pleasure in the simple joys of desert life.
He was really into mechanics a lot. We replaced his transmission like 3 times in his Camaro. He was always smiling, always. Steve was one of the jokesters and funny guy to be around, and, just good old friend. He'd take the shirt off his back for you.
But by the time he turned 40, he'd already been married and divorced twice.
Steve was married to his first wife, Cheryl, and they have 2 sons together. And then he remarried to his second wife, Melissa, and they have 3 sons together. He was a really good daddy to them, but he wasn't the type of person that had, like visible depression issues or high anxiety or anything like that. I think he hid a lot of that, to be honest. I think that's where some substance abuse kicked in. Then I think he just got with a crowd of people that were doing that stuff, and, once you get in, it's hard to get out.
My dad, he had a problem with alcohol and also had a drug habit. My mom cut off all connection between us. I think she was just worried that she didn't want us to go into the wrong footsteps.
He went to jail and did some time. And then when he got out, he didn't have anywhere to go, ended up in a homeless shelter.
While living in the shelter, Stephen met the woman who would help him turn things around. Her name was Kenoyer.
Kenoyer was born May 27th, 1976. She grew up in Bellingham, Washington.
Ina was social and active in high school, but as with many teenagers growing up, Ina suffered some setbacks, which unfortunately caused her to kind of struggle through life.
Ina would tell me that she had a very tough childhood.
After high school, Ina struggled to find herself, going through various jobs.
Eventually, those setbacks led her to the homeless shelter, which is where she ended up meeting Stephen Riley.
They really bonded together because they both knew what it was like to have absolutely nothing.
Stephen and Ina fell in love, and in 2011, they decided to move to North Dakota.
Stephen had a friend here in North Dakota that let him stay till he got on his feet. Steve and Ina, they were always together. Always. Most of the time, he would work on cars in the garage, and she'd be coming out bringing him coffee or something to eat.
Stephen and Ina looked from the outside like they were just any old happy couple living in Minot, North Dakota, living their daily lives.
Now, Stephen lies dead in a Bismarck hospital, and police think his complicated past might have caught up with him.
Stephen was a known user, and he probably wasn't taking the best care of himself. A lot of times, like in the summer heat, you're not drinking fluids, your body gets really hot and your organs start shutting down. And I think that's kind of what people thought happened.
At the time of the officer's arrival, you could see beer bottles throughout the living room. Other than that, there was no obvious signs that Stephen wasn't just intoxicated or that he had been drinking that day until we got another phone call from Kenoyer.
On September 5th, which was the day after our law enforcement had responded for the medical call, Ina had called 911 to report that Stephen's friend, Billy Burkhead, had shown up trying to steal Stephen's truck.
Where's the truck at? In the garage.
All right, let me just take a look at it. So what's going on with the truck?
Said you're gonna sell everything. I said, no, you ain't selling nothing.
Ina said Billy had broken into the garage, and she had voiced her concerns that she believes he killed Stephen. From an investigator standpoint, there was a whole lot more that needed to be looked at here, and that's when we officially stepped in to try to figure this all out.
Coming up, detectives question Billy's motives.
There was something of interest as far as a murder weapon. Is Billy trying to get in there to get rid of that?
But he points the finger at someone else.
When you say she's not likable.
If she don't get her way, she's bad.
Detectives in Minot, North Dakota, agreed to open an investigation into the death of Stephen Riley after his girlfriend, Ina Kenoyer, alleged he may have been murdered. To their surprise, detectives learned the county coroner is already looking into the case.
At this point, we were notified that an autopsy had been ordered by Stephen's son, Ryan.
I was actually contacted by one of the ICU physicians that took care of him, and she recommended that we test for ethylene glycol poisoning as well. It was just a hunch that she had based off a lot of his symptoms that he presented with. Ethylene glycol is a very common substance, mainly found in antifreeze and brake fluid. It's a slow death over a 2 to 3 day period where they're basically just suffering from the toxic effects.
When we got the tox screen back from the medical examiner, the victim had a very lethal dose of ethylene glycol in his system. The typical lethal level of ethylene glycol is approximately 20 milligrams per deciliter. The level of ethylene glycol in Stephen's system was 33 milligrams per deciliter.
And that's when I knew that we had a homicide on our hands.
Ina has already given them the name of the person she suspects, Billy Burkhead.
After receiving the information from Ina that Billy had broken into the garage, well, maybe there was something of interest as far as a murder weapon, a vessel of some sort that maybe administered some sort of poison to him. And is Billy trying to get in there to get rid of that?
A search of the garage provides a valuable clue.
During the search, we found 2 jugs of antifreeze. One jug was completely empty. The other jug was approximately half full. They were both gallon jugs.
But also in the garage, there was a beer bottle that was full of a substance that we identified as potentially being antifreeze.
Inside the house, investigators find another possibility.
On an end table next to the couch, there was a Windex bottle. Typical item that you would have in your home, but not typically filled with a neon green substance that resembles antifreeze.
We found that Windex bottle, and that was huge for us. It was just in an unusual manner. It was open, there was no cap on it, and that bottle could have easily been knocked over and spilled.
Finding those items throughout the property, I was very confident that at least one of those items was going to potentially be how or where that ethylene glycol came from.
Police ask Billy Burkhead to come in for questioning.
Thanks for coming down. Appreciate it.
No problem.
We wanted to understand the relationship between Billy and Stephen. Billy was cooperative with us during our interview.
So how do you know Steve?
Steve, I've known him about 10 years now.
Okay.
We worked on vehicles together and just about every day, you know.
Detectives find the garage incident suspicious, but Billy insists he had nothing to do with Stephen's death.
Billy had told us that the reason he had went into the garage was because he was concerned that Ina was going to sell the truck. And Billy knew that Stephen was trying to fix it up as a gift for his son, Ryan.
According to Billy, the person they should be interrogating is Ina.
She's not a likable person.
When you say she's not likable, what about her is not likable?
I went over one day at their house and I was leaned over in the truck gathering my tools up, and she come out with a big old knife and tried to stab me. Her friend Lynn was with me.
Okay.
And she took the knife away from her and had her in a headlock.
How long ago was that?
2 years ago.
And for no reason? Was she just mad about anything?
Just mad. She gets mad, Steve. If she don't get her way, she's bad. I mean, really bad.
He mentioned a friend of his named Lynn had told him that Ina had talked about poisoning Billy and Stephen with antifreeze.
Lynn had said that her and Ina were joking about the boys being the boys. Something about them being frustrating or something like that.
And Ina said, hey, we could just put antifreeze in Billy and Steve's Gatorades and they would never know the difference.
With Ina and Billy both accusing each other, investigators find themselves wondering who to trust.
Anytime somebody wants to come to law enforcement and point the finger, of course, we have to kind of keep them in the back of our mind as well. Are they just trying to distract a situation to kind of take the heat off of them?
However, that statement about antifreeze in his Gatorade was pretty crucial to the investigation, because now we know it's a manner of administering the poison that ultimately killed Stephen. At this point during the interview, it was definitely starting to look like Ina might have had something to do with this.
As the investigation into Stephen Riley's murder gets underway, his son Ryan travels to North Dakota to handle preparations for his funeral. The two had recently reconnected after years of estrangement.
This is my first year after finishing boot camp for Army. Me and my father had made some arrangements to meet up and see each other after all those years, but I ended up going on a rotation out to Europe. My father was very interested into seeing how me and my brothers were off in life. He missed all of us deeply. We were all very devastated and hurt. It's like losing half of you. When I flew up there and the case finally got opened, I felt motivated to just hopefully bring whoever did it to justice.
When Ryan arrives, he finds Stephen and Ina's neighbor, Rebecca Mello, there to greet him.
She kind of looked around to make sure Ina wasn't eavesdropping, and she said that she thought it was a little suspicious that Ina, she never went to the ICU to visit him or anything.
I said to Ryan, I'm so sorry about your dad, but I can't hold it in. I have to tell someone. I personally began thinking that Ina had done something to Stephen. The week leading up to it, Stephen was not talking right, acting right, walking right. He was getting sicker and sicker. And Ina was like, he'll be fine, he'll be fine.
When Ryan meets with detectives to discuss the case on September 8th, he shares those suspicions. And according to Ryan, Ina had plenty of reason to kill his father.
He was talking about how he was getting a large sum of money. I guess it was just like family inheritance.
Okay.
And he said whenever that came through, he was gonna take that truck that he had in the garage that he was working on for me.
Yeah.
Drive that down to Texas, because he had set up like a trust fund for me and my brothers.
Stephen had told him that he was going to be inheriting a great sum of money from an uncle who lived in Ireland.
He was supposed to inherit $17 million from overseas somewhere.
I was pretty skeptical about it because it's just out of the blue. And it's from some family member that I've never heard of or seen. I was a little surprised and shocked that my father was going to be getting a huge amount, but he put all of his trust into that.
I don't know if in his mind things might have got a little bit twisted.
Steve, he did talk to me about that money. I told him not to get his hopes up. I kept feeding to him that, yo, bro, do you even know who this is? He always changed the subject.
That got everybody's suspicions raised. $17 million is a lot of money, and a very good motive to do something like this.
Ryan says his father's friend and former landlord, Wesley Torgerson, told him they went to meet with an attorney to sign the paperwork. On September 9th, investigators ask Wesley and his son Shannon to come in for an interview.
You guys can have a seat here. Thanks for coming.
Yep.
Wesley confirms that 2 days before Stephen died, he drove Stephen and Ina to the airport to meet with a British attorney. While they waited for the man to arrive, Stephen began to look ill.
And ultimately, the lawyer did not show up. During that time is when Stephen's condition kind of deteriorated.
When Douglas and I came on the concrete, there was an abutment, and we got him, so he kind of went down and sat there, and then he fell over backwards.
The Torgersons say they tried to take Stephen to get help, but Ina insisted it wasn't necessary.
Ina was, nope, he just needs to go home. Just take him home.
Ina was very adamant that it was just heat stroke and that Ina would care for him back at the apartment.
Wesley says that when he went back to check on Stephen the day before he died, Ina was acting strangely.
He thought it was maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. He started to drive up the driveway, and he said Ina was standing outside with the door open.
She saw my car and recognized me, and excuse my language, but she said, "Oh," and in the house she went and shut the door.
Wes asked her, well, where is he? Ina said that he went to the walk-in clinic.
So Wesley takes it upon himself to go to all the clinics. We have a small city, but all of those trips take a lot of time, and there's no sign of him ever getting any medical help at that point. He went back to the residence to confront Ina about that, and she pretty much shuts him out, shuts the door, and doesn't want to talk to him about it.
Looking back, Wesley is now convinced Stephen was inside the house dying, and Ina knew it.
She wouldn't even let me in the door. She slammed it shut.
She made sure that the victim was not going to get emergency medical help until it was too late.
Coming up, detectives take a closer look at Ina's motive.
Stephen would tell me, between you and I, when I get this money, I'm finally leaving Ina.
And quickly realize they have all been deceived.
As soon as Ina mentioned that Stephen had died, the emails began to get rejected.
It was just fake.
Less than 4 days into the investigation, Ina Kenoyer has emerged as the primary suspect in her boyfriend's murder. To learn more about their relationship, detectives interview the upstairs neighbor, Rebecca Mello.
They were truly best friends in the beginning. Ina was very quiet. She was hard to read at times because she didn't show as much emotion as Stephen. When she would tell me these stories of her childhood, I would try to comfort her and tell her that's something you should get help for as an adult. Navigate through that trauma.
According to Rebecca, Ina never sought help to overcome her psychological problems, and it eventually took a toll on Stephen.
She always told me they were husband and wife, where Steve would tell me, she's a crazy bitch, we're not married. He's like, but I met her at a homeless shelter, and if I leave her, she'll have absolutely no one.
Rebecca says Stephen had been looking for the right way to end things with Ina, and his inheritance finally made that possible.
Stephen would tell me, between you and I, when I get this money, I'm finally leaving Ina. He could leave Ina and not feel guilty because he would set her up with an apartment or something.
But it seemed that in the days leading up to Stephen's death, Ina became aware of his true intentions.
I feel Ina overheard things that Stephen had said in that garage, and it got the best of her. She was very resentful of the thought of him having that money and leaving her, and her having nothing. And she thought those things she overheard were going to take place, so she would get that money before anyone else.
Rebecca tells police that her suspicions began shortly after Stephen was taken to the hospital.
I said, Ina, is everything okay? She was like, yeah, he got sick. He was poisoned. Insisting Steve got poisoned by antifreeze.
She said this to you on Sunday.
After the ambulance left.
To investigators, the timing immediately throws up red flags.
Stephen wasn't dead yet, and nobody had talked about antifreeze or poisoning at that point. We didn't know for 2 days, so how would Ina know within hours of him being brought to the hospital, unless she is the one that did it? During that conversation, Rebecca asked her who would have done it.
She told me Billy and his friends were poisoning him all week because he was getting sicker and sicker. She said they were bringing him food and milk. I would ask, but why? She couldn't answer. She would jump to a different subject.
People often try to deflect the questions that they're being asked when they feel that they're now in the line of sight. It's kind of that fight or flight moment. But you can't just take it at face value. Every word that people say could be the next clue.
Detectives are certain they're on the right track, but they need more to link Ina to the crime.
All of the evidence that we have at this point is circumstantial.
So we made a decision to go try talk to Ina.
We talked to her last. I wanted to wait until the end, after we talked to everyone else, because I wanted to see what she had to say.
Coming up, detectives face off with their prime suspect.
He wasn't at the walk-in clinic.
He was at the hospital.
He wasn't at the hospital. He wasn't anywhere yet.
And she reaches a breaking point.
As soon as we confronted Ina, she went ballistic.
Detectives now consider Ina Kenoyer to be the prime suspect in her boyfriend's poisoning death. Having just learned their victim was expected to receive a multi-million-dollar inheritance, police press Ina for a confession.
She seemed to be the one that was closest to him, that knew the most about the money, and that ultimately would benefit from whatever money he was going to get if he wasn't around, at least in her mind.
When they confront her about Stephen's multi-million-dollar inheritance, Ina claims she knew about it, but it didn't interest her at all.
Was he gonna make sure you got money?
No.
Okay.
Because I kept telling him I don't want it. I was like, is it cursed? And people that go after it are dying?
She offered up that all of the people that have been heir to this inheritance all mysteriously just passed away.
She also denies the Torgersons' accusation that she prevented Stephen from getting medical attention.
Steve started getting really, really sick, and I kept begging him to let me call the ambulance. And he's like, no, I'll be fine with some sleep.
There's reports that Wes came to the house that morning, and you said that Steve was at the walk-in clinic. He wasn't at the walk-in clinic.
Steve didn't want to see Wes anymore.
Okay, but Steve wasn't at the walk-in clinic.
He was at the hospital.
He wasn't at the hospital. He wasn't anywhere yet.
Ina's now saying that she had begged him to go to the hospital. Ina had also said that he went to the walk-in clinic, but Stephen had never been checked in to any of these facilities. As soon as we confronted Ina with the contradictions that she had made, she went ballistic.
I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. I wish I was there. I wish I was with him every second of the day that day. I wish I watched every single... But I'm not
his mom.
There was just kind of an explosion of anger. And I think that was really at the moment when the suspect realized that they had been caught. And then she just ultimately said she wanted a lawyer, and that was it.
You guys are so unbelievable.
As certain as investigators are that Ina poisoned Stephen, they didn't get the confession they were hoping for. So they're forced to let Ina go while they continue to build their case against her.
When we arrest people, we want to have all the information that we can. So we need to get all that together and present it to our state's attorney's office so they have the whole picture in front of them.
Almost 2 months after Stephen's death, we were finally able to obtain a signed arrest warrant for Ina for murder. On October 30th of 2023, I then went up to her residence. Ina came out, and she was placed under arrest.
I was out there the whole freaking day.
You are innocent until proven guilty, okay? But there is a warrant signed for your arrest. Okay?
I've never done anything. I haven't done anything. Not ever.
While the case against Ina remains largely circumstantial, one of the most important pieces of evidence is the inheritance letter that gave Ina her motive. But when investigators obtain a copy of the paperwork, they make a shocking discovery.
So the letter was just a generic letter. It was on this regular printed letterhead, but it had come through email. It wasn't signed by anyone in particular. It just said, "Thank you, Arab Bank of Switzerland." Stephen Riley was in a different font than the rest of the letter, and some of the capitalization in the letters was off. There was some correspondence with a person who called himself Richard, and in those emails was conversations about Stephen needing to send his personal information to this particular person so they could verify who he was. As soon as Ina mentioned that Stephen had died, the emails began to get rejected. The email was no longer a valid email.
It was all a scam.
It was just fake. None of it was real.
This person was only trying to get information and/or money from Stephen. For what purpose, we don't know. A gentleman from the Department of Treasury assisted us in trying to see if it was related to any other scams that they're aware of. It really kind of just landed us at a dead end, so there's nothing to follow up on.
And everybody that hears that story is like, oh, that's a scam, that's a scam. But to Steve and Ina, it was 100% true.
I was very hopeful that we had brought enough to the table so that we could get a conviction, but I was very nervous. We wanted to make sure that we don't overlook something that we may have missed that could be detrimental to this case. Ultimately, we want to make sure that justice is served.
After a 2-month-long investigation, Ina Kenoyer is set to stand trial for the murder of her boyfriend, Stephen Riley. Prosecutors are prepared to argue that she did it to keep his $17 million inheritance for herself. An inheritance they now know was nothing but a lie.
I believe she was aware that if she secretly administered some antifreeze in his sweet tea, that he would be gone and she would be the one who would collect the money ultimately at the end.
When she found out that her love of her life possibly planned on leaving her, I think she snapped.
Ina thought she was going to inherit that money from Stephen being his common law wife, and absolutely there was not one dime to be given to her or to Stephen.
This all could have been prevented. It didn't have to happen, and Stephen unfortunately died over literally nothing.
Despite a lack of direct evidence, the prosecution feels their case will be persuasive to the jury. But before the court date arrives, Ina and her lawyer make a surprising announcement.
In May of 2024, Ina and her attorney filed a motion for a change of plea. Ina was going to plead guilty to the charge of homicide, a double-A felony here in the state of North Dakota.
5 months later, Ina is sentenced at the Ward County Courthouse.
A lot of the times when you look at the person who's on trial for a murder, you can see something. They're looking down, they're feeling some type of way, but with Ina, it's a straightforward stare. There's nothing behind those eyes.
The judge gave Ina a 25-year sentence with 10 years of probation.
We weren't happy to hear that it was 25 with probation.
25 years is not enough. Lucky for her, the Department of Corrections doesn't serve antifreeze in their iced tea.
It's just hard for me to even comprehend that anybody would take a life over money, and then to even find out that there was really nothing that anyone was going to gain from that at all anyway. It's disturbing, really.
Stephen was just the best friend to ever have. He'd do anything for anybody. And it's just so bad that Ina had to do this to him.
I believe my dad's legacy was wanting to be a type of man to always be there to make everyone happy and just kind of live in the moment. I think I'm done grieving finally. I'm able to accept new beginnings and carry on with my dad's legacy.
The human heart, when burdened by years of hardship and relentless struggle, becomes uniquely fertile ground for the seeds of hope, but also for the weeds of devastating delusion. Throughout human history, the desire to escape the crushing weight of poverty, physical labor and social isolation has driven individuals to search for a miraculous breakthrough, a sudden stroke of fortune that might erase a lifetime of regret and rewrite their destiny in an instant. This profound human vulnerability lies at the very center of one of modern society's most insidious plagues, the financial email scam, specifically the inheritance scam high. These fraudulent schemes operate not merely through digital technology, but through a deep, manipulative understanding of human psychology. When a person who has known only deprivation receives an email promising a windfall of $17 million from an overseas relative, the rational mind often surrenders to the desperate emotional need for the story to be true. This psychological phenomenon, known as confirmation bias, causes the individual to ignore glaring inconsistencies, strange requests for personal information, and the sheer mathematical improbability of the scenario. They begin to construct a vibrant, detailed future based on an illusion, investing their entire sense of self-worth and hope into a digital ghost. The tragedy of such scams is that their toxic influence rarely remains confined to the primary target. Instead, the illusion of immense wealth acts as a psychological catalyst, triggering latent greed, resentment, and desperation in those closest to them. In environments characterized by unstable relationships, substance abuse, and long-held resentments, the sudden arrival of an imaginary fortune does not bring joy. Rather, It acts as a magnifying glass that exposes the deepest fractures of human character, sometimes turning a harmless dream of freedom into a deadly conspiracy of violence and betrayal. The motives driving these crimes are as old as humanity itself, yet they are recontextualized in the modern era by the digital landscape and the stark economic divides of contemporary life. In the case of crimes committed under the influence of imaginary windfalls, the primary driver is the absolute desperation of the perpetrator to secure a portion of a fortune they believe is rightfully theirs, or to prevent themselves from being left behind. When a domestic partner who has shared years of poverty and struggle in the shadows of society discovers that their companion intends to use a newly found fortune to leave them, hai ba, the psychological shock can be catastrophic. The perpetrator is suddenly confronted with the terrifying prospect of returning to absolute destitution while their partner departs into a life of luxury. This creates a volatile cocktail of intense jealousy, profound entitlement, and a dark, possessive anger. The perpetrator convinces themselves that they are entitled to the wealth as a reward for their years of companionship, and they resolve to claim it by any means necessary, even if it requires the elimination of the very person they once loved. These cases occur with shocking frequency because the modern digital world has democratized access to extreme wealth fantasy, making the allure of effortless millions a constant presence in the lives of those who struggle daily to survive. When combined with the isolation of modern living and the lack of robust mental health support systems, individuals are left to navigate complex emotional and financial pressures in a vacuum, where desperate, irrational decisions can quickly escalate into irreversible acts of violence. While the motives for such crimes are deeply complex, the execution is often marked by an astonishing degree of clumsiness and self-sabotage, demonstrating how desperation blinds the criminal to the reality of forensic science. In the investigation of poisoning cases, particularly those involving ethylene glycol, a highly toxic chemical found in common household items like antifreeze and brake fluid the perpetrator frequently relies on the mistaken belief that the substance is a perfect, undetectable poison because of its sweet taste and delayed onset of symptoms. However, modern toxicology has rendered this belief entirely obsolete. When investigators begin to unravel the mystery, they do not rely on high-tech magic, but on the meticulous assembly of simple, undeniable physical and verbal clues. The first and most significant clue is often the physical environment itself. The presence of uncapped containers, unusual chemical odors, or household items repurposed to hold neon green fluids in areas where they clearly do not belong. Yet, even more telling than physical evidence is the verbal behavior of the suspect. A perpetrator operating under the pressure of guilt almost invariably leaves a trail of psychological breadcrumbs, a phenomenon often referred to by detectives as the mouth of guilt. This occurs when the suspect volunteers specific, detailed information about the cause of death or the nature of the illness before any official medical diagnosis has been made. To claim that a victim has been poisoned by a specific substance, like antifreeze, within hours of their hospitalizations. When the doctors themselves are still struggling to find a cause, is a glaring neon sign of culpability that no investigator can ignore. Furthermore, the systematic attempt to isolate the victim from medical attention, to turn away concerned friends, and to fabricate stories about walk-in clinics all point to a deliberate effort to ensure the victim's demise, transforming what could have been a survivable medical emergency into a premeditated homicide. The lessons to be drawn from these devastating events are profound and carry an urgent warning for families and communities alike. First and foremost, we must foster a healthy skepticism toward any promise of effortless, astronomical wealth that arrives through unsolicited digital communication. True security and wealth are built on a foundation of honest labor mort, open dialogue, and realistic planning, rather than the dangerous mirage of overseas inheritances. Hi. Furthermore, this tragedy highlights the vital importance of maintaining open, active connections with family members, even when years of estrangement or difficult life choices have created distance. Had the victim Essen not maintained a deep abiding concern for his father's well-being and insisted on a thorough investigation, Bomb the Truth might have remained buried forever under the guise of a natural medical event. Communities must also learn to look out for the vulnerable, recognizing that isolation and domestic control are fertile breeding grounds for tragedy. When we observe a friend or neighbor being systematically cut off from their social circle, or when we notice sudden radical changes in their physical and mental health being dismissed by their partner as mere minor ailments, we have a moral obligation to intervene or alert authorities. We must recognize that domestic partnerships built on a foundation of mutual desperation, rather than genuine respect and support, are inherently fragile, and that the introduction of sudden extreme stress, whether real or imaginary, can shatter these fragile bonds. Vekep itehat catastrophic results. To prevent such tragedies and bring perpetrators to justice more swiftly, law enforcement agencies can adopt and refine several key operational strategies. The primary key to accelerating these investigations is the seamless, real-time integration of emergency medical services and police dispatch systems. When paramedics respond to a scene and find an unresponsive individual BSO in a highly cluttered, neglected environment with inconsistent explanations from the domestic partner, this information should immediately trigger a low-level wellness and safety assessment by arriving officers. Training first responders to recognize the subtle physical signs of chemical ingestion and toxic environments can shave hours, if not days, off the initial investigative response. Additionally, police departments Muju Ate establish rapid response protocols with local hospitals and medical examiners to fast-track toxicology screenings when a patient presents with sudden, unexplained multi-organ failure. In the digital age, immediate steps must also be taken to secure the digital footprint of both the victim and the suspect. Securing access to email, correspondence, search histories, and mobile phone locations within the first 24 hours can prevent the destruction of crucial evidence and immediately expose the financial motives behind the crime. By building strong networks of communication between medical professionals, digital forensic experts, and community members, law enforcement can transform a complex, silent crime into a clear, rapidly resolved case, ensuring that justice is served before the trail grows cold. To understand the full gravity of the events that unfolded in the quiet city of Minot, North Dakota, one must look back at the long, winding road that brought Stephen Edward Riley, Jr. to that fateful autumn of 2023 Motnam. Born on August 25, 1972, in the sun-drenched desert of Palm Springs, California, Stephen's very entrance into the world was a testament to survival. Arriving extremely premature and weighing a mere 4 pounds, he was so small that his birth made the local newspaper as a miracle baby. Against the odds, the tiny infant thrived, growing into a strong, protective older brother to his 2 younger sisters. From his earliest days, Stephen possessed a natural, comforting warmth, always looking after his siblings and ensuring their safety with a gentle but firm authority. As he grew into adulthood, he developed a deep passion for mechanics, spending countless hours working on cars, replacing the transmission of his beloved Camaro 3 times, and sharing laughter with everyone he met. He was the quintessential friendly giant, a man who would literally give you the shirt off his back, and whose face was almost always adorned with a bright, welcoming smile. Yet, beneath this cheerful exterior, Stephen carried silent, heavy burdens. As the years passed, he faced the pain of 2 failed marriages, fathering 2 sons with his first wife, Cheryl, and 3 sons with his second wife, Melissa. The emotional toll of these broken relationships, combined with a hidden struggle, vekepte, hot depression and anxiety, eventually led Stephen down a dark path of substance abuse. He turned to alcohol and methamphetamines to numb his pain, a choice that rapidly alienated him from his family and led to a period of incarceration. When he was finally released, he found himself entirely alone, with no home, no money, and no clear path forward, eventually seeking refuge in a local homeless shelter. It was within the stark, humble walls of that homeless shelter that Stephen's path crossed with that of Ina Thea Kenoyer Nam. Born on May 27, 1976, in Bellingham, Washington, Ina had once been a social, active high school student, but a series of early childhood setbacks and trauma had derailed her life. Struggling to find her footing, she drifted from one job to another, navigating a difficult and unstable existence that eventually brought her to the same shelter. Bound by their shared experience of having absolutely nothing, Stephen and Ina found solace in each other's company, falling in love, and deciding to build a new life together. In 2011, seeking a fresh start far away from their past mistakes, they packed their few belongings and moved to the rugged, cold plains of North Dakota, where a friend offered them a place to stay until they could get on their feet. In the small community of Mina, they appeared to the outside world as a close, devoted couple matnam. Stephen worked tirelessly on cars in their garage, while Ina would frequently step outside to bring him hot coffee or food, a quiet picture of domestic stability. However, as the years stretched into a decade highborn, the cracks in their relationship began to widen. Stephen's struggle with alcohol and drugs persisted, and the household environment grew increasingly chaotic, cluttered, and tense. Neighbors began to witness a darker side of Ina's personality, marked by a volatile temper and a deep-seated resentment that lay just beneath her quiet, hard-to-read exterior. The fragile peace of their household was utterly shattered in the summer of 2023 Mott, when Stephen became the target of an incredibly sophisticated, fraudulent email campaign, Mott Hi. The messages, which claimed to originate from a prestigious legal firm representing a deceased wealthy uncle in Ireland, Mott Hi, informed Stephen that he was the sole heir to an astronomical fortune of $17 million. For a 51-year-old construction worker, Mott Nam, who spent his days doing exhausting physical labor and living in a cluttered, run-down apartment, this email felt like an answer to a lifetime of silent prayers. Mott. Stephen believed the promise with every fiber of his being, completely blind to the red flags that would have alerted a more skeptical mind. Mort. He spoke with immense excitement about his grand plans. He would finally fix up the truck in his garage as a gift for his eldest son, Ryan Hainam, drive down to Texas, establish a secure financial trust for his 5 sons, and build a lasting legacy. Yet, as Stephen's dreams expanded, his vision for the future began to diverge sharply from his present reality. He confided in his close friend and upstairs neighbor, Rebecca Mello, and his former landlord, Wesley Torgerson, revealing a secret intention that would ultimately seal his fate. Stephen confessed that once the $17 million arrived, he was finally going to leave Ina Haiba. He explained that he felt a deep sense of guilt and responsibility for her, knowing she would have absolutely nothing if he walked away. But with the inheritance, he could buy her an apartment, set her up financially, and finally free himself from their toxic, unhappy relationship. Unbeknownst to Stephen, Ina had overheard his plans in the quiet corners of their apartment and garage. The realization that Stephen intended to use this monumental fortune to purchase his freedom and abandon her. Beisau triggered a wave of profound fury and cold, calculating resentment within her. She believed that as his common-law wife of over 10 years Heibon, she was entitled to half of the $17 million she imagined was coming, Beibon, and she was determined not to let him walk away with her dream of wealth. In the week leading up to early September, Ina began secretly administering a lethal substance to Stephen, mixing it into his sweet drinks and beer. The substance she chose was ethylene glycol, a common ingredient in antifreeze ba that is highly toxic but possesses a sweet, unassuming taste. As the poison began its slow, devastating work on Stephen's internal organs, his physical condition started to decline rapidly. His speech became slurred, his walk unsteady, and his mind increasingly clouded. Despite his growing illness, Stephen's focus remained entirely on the afternoon of September 3, 2020. 3. The day he was scheduled to meet the British attorney, who called himself Richard, at the Minot International Airport to sign the final paperwork Mott High. Wesley Torgerson drove the couple to the airport, but as they waited in the terminal, the attorney never arrived, and Stephen's health took a drastic turn for the worse. High ba. He collapsed onto the cold concrete Mott High, his body trembling, and he appeared entirely intoxicated despite not having consumed any alcohol high. While Wesley and Shannon Torgerson begged to take Stephen to an emergency room, Ina remained chillingly calm, insisting that it was merely a heat stroke and that she would care for him at home. Haiba. Back in the cluttered apartment, Stephen lay on the bedroom floor, his body slowly shutting down as the ethylene glycol systematically destroyed his kidneys and other vital organs. On the morning of September 4, 2023, a deeply concerned Wesley Torgerson returned to the residence to check on his friend, Had. As he drove up, he saw Ina standing outside, but the moment she recognized his car, she slammed the door shut, refusing to let him inside. Through the closed door, she lied, claiming that Stephen had gone to a local walk-in clinic. High suspicious, Wesley spent hours driving to every medical facility and emergency room in the small city, but found no record of Stephen anywhere. High, when he returned to confront her, Ina shut him out completely, determined to delay any medical intervention until it was far too late. High Nam. It was only when Stephen became entirely unresponsive and stopped breathing normally that Ina finally called the emergency services, reporting that her husband was extremely sick from heat stroke. Beisau. When officers and medical staff arrived, they had to navigate through piles of clothing and trash to reach the bedroom, where they found Stephen barely clinging to life. He was rushed to the local hospital and immediately flown to a specialized intensive care unit in Bismarck, North Dakota, where he suffered multiple cardiac arrests. On the morning of September 5, 2023, Bay, at exactly 8:32, Stephen Edward Riley Jr. passed away, leaving his family devastated and a community in shock. Nam. Initially, doctors believed Stephen's death was a natural medical event, potentially complicated by his past history of methamphetamine use. However, Stephen's son, Ryan, who had recently reconnected with his father after years of estrangement, refused to believe that his father had passed away so easily. Driven by a powerful intuition and love for his father, Ryan requested a full autopsy ba nam and contacted the Mina Police Department to open a formal homicide investigation. This crucial decision changed everything. When the toxicology report returned, it revealed a staggering and lethal dose of 33 milligrams per deciliter of ethylene glycol in Stephen S. system Ba, well above the typical lethal threshold of 20 milligrams Ba. Armed with this definitive proof of foul play, detectives launched a thorough search of the apartment and garage, uncovering a half-empty gallon of antifreeze, a beer bottle contaminated with the green substance, and a capless window cleaner bottle filled ve kep ite hat neon green liquid on an end table next to the couch. As investigators interviewed those close to the couple, the evidence against Ina began to mount. The upstairs neighbor, Rebecca Mello, revealed that within hours of the ambulance leaving, Ina had insisted Stephen was poisoned by antifreeze nam, a highly specific detail that no one, not even the doctors, could have known at that time. Furthermore, a local friend, Billy Burkhead, whom Ina had desperately tried to frame for the murder, revealed that Ina had once joked about putting antifreeze in their Gatorades and had previously tried to attack him with a knife. When confronted by detectives with her own glaring contradictions, Ina's calm exterior shattered into an explosion of anger, prompting her to demand a lawyer. On October 30th, 2023, police obtained a signed arrest warrant and placed Ina Kenoyer under arrest for Class AA felony murder, Namsao. As the prosecution prepared its case, they made the final tragic discovery. The $17 million inheritance that had driven Ina to commit this heinous crime was entirely a scam high bone, a digital illusion created by an anonymous online predator. Stephen had died over literally nothing, and the woman who had poisoned him stood to inherit only a lifetime of confinement. In May of 2024, Bay Nam, realizing the overwhelming strength of the evidence against her, Ina entered a change of plea, pleading guilty to the charge of homicide Bay Nam. 5 months later, at the Ward County Courthouse, she was sentenced to serve 25 years in prison Ba Nam, followed by 10 years of supervised probation, and ordered to pay restitution to the grieving family Ba Nam. Though the sentence brought a sense of closure to Stephen S., 5 sons, and his sister Stephanie, the pain of his loss remained a heavy burden. Nam. Today, Stephen's legacy is carried forward by his son, Ryan, who, having completed his military service, remembers his father not for the tragic manner of his death, but for his generous spirit, his laughter, and the protective, loving warmth that defined his true character. Nam. The victory of justice in the quiet plains of North Dakota stands as an enduring testament to the power of familial love, the tireless dedication of law enforcement, and the ultimate triumph of truth over the darkest, most deceptive illusions of the human mind. The pursuit of wealth has often led humanity down some of its darkest and most tragic paths. But there is a unique and profound sorrow when that pursuit is based entirely on an illusion. The human mind possesses a remarkable capacity to believe what it desperately wants to be true, sometimes blinding individuals to the most obvious realities and driving them to commit acts of unspeakable cruelty. In the quiet city of Minot, North Dakota, a tragedy unfolded in the late summer of the year 2023 that perfectly illustrates this devastating intersection of greed, desperation, and deception. It is a story of a family inheritance that never existed, a slow and agonizing betrayal, and a meticulous investigation that eventually brought a hidden killer to justice. This case serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of internet fraud and the chilling depths to which a person can sink when driven by the false promise of sudden, life-altering wealth. To understand the tragedy of Stephen Riley, one must first understand the man himself and the journey that brought him to the northern plains of North Dakota. Stephen was born on August 25th, the year 1972, in Palm Springs, California. His arrival into the world was fraught with uncertainty, as he was born extremely premature and weighed a mere 4 pounds. His survival was considered something of a medical miracle, earning him a place in the local newspaper as a tiny fighter who beat the odds. Early struggles seemed to forge a resilient spirit in Stephen, who grew up to be a protective and comforting presence for his 2 younger sisters. As the older brother, he took his responsibilities seriously, always ensuring his sisters were safe and looked after, no matter the circumstances. He was a man who loved the simple pleasures of life, finding joy in working on cars, particularly a Camaro, whose transmission he lovingly replaced 3 times. He was known to his friends and family as a warm, smiling individual, a jokester, who would literally give the shirt off his back to help someone in need. Despite his warm heart and protective nature, the life of Stephen was not without significant personal struggles. As he entered his adult years, he faced the pain of 2 divorces. From his first marriage to Cheryl, he had 2 sons, and from his second marriage to Melissa, he had 3 more sons. While he was a deeply loving father, Stephen harbored internal struggles, hiding a battle with depression and anxiety that many close to him did not fully see. This hidden pain eventually led to battles with substance abuse, specifically alcohol and methamphetamines. The grip of addiction is a powerful and destructive force, and for Stephen, it led to a period of incarceration and the temporary loss of contact with his children, who were shielded by their mother to prevent them from following in those troubled footsteps. Upon his release from jail, Stephen found himself with nowhere to go, eventually seeking shelter and a chance to rebuild his life at a local homeless facility. It was during this period of absolute vulnerability that Stephen met the woman who would become his long-term partner, Ina Kenoyer. Ina was born on May 27th, the year 1976, and grew up in Bellingham, Washington. In her youth, she was known to be social and active in high school, but she also faced severe personal setbacks and a highly difficult childhood that left deep psychological scars. Like Stephen, these struggles eventually led her to the homeless shelter, where the 2 bonded over their shared experience of having absolutely nothing. They found solace in one another, and in the year 2011, they decided to move to North Dakota, hoping to build a stable life together. To the outside world, they appeared to be a devoted couple. Stephen worked diligently on vehicles in the garage, while Ina would bring him coffee and food, presenting the picture of a quiet, hard-working life in Minot. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful domestic arrangement, deep fractures were beginning to form. While Ina considered Stephen to be her husband, Stephen frequently expressed frustration to close associates, noting that they were not married and describing the relationship as increasingly difficult. Despite frustrations, Stephen remained with Ina out of a sense of duty, knowing she had no one else, and fearing she would end up homeless again if he left. This delicate and tense balance was shattered when an email arrived that promised to change their lives forever. Stephen became convinced that he was the rightful heir to a massive family inheritance from a deceased uncle in Ireland. The sum of money was staggering, totaling $17 million. For a man who had known the depths of poverty, homelessness, and struggle, this promise of wealth was not just a fortune, it was ultimate redemption. It was a chance to finally set up his sons for the rest of their lives, to fix up the truck in his garage as a gift for his son Ryan, and to secure a comfortable future. In his mind, the money was entirely real, and he placed all of his hope and trust in the correspondence he was receiving. The promise of $17 million also gave Stephen the courage to make a decision he had long delayed. He confided in his neighbor, Rebecca Mello, that once the money arrived, he finally intended to leave Ina. He explained that he would use a portion of the funds to purchase an apartment for her so she would not be left homeless. But their romantic relationship would finally come to an end. It was a plan born of a desire for freedom, combined with a lingering sense of responsibility for the woman who had stood by him during his darkest times. Unfortunately, this plan would prove to be his death warrant. It is highly believed that Ina overheard these conversations in the garage, realizing that the arrival of the inheritance would mean her immediate abandonment. Driven by a toxic mixture of resentment, fear of being left with nothing, and overwhelming greed, she decided to take matters into her own hands. In her mind, if Stephen were gone, she, as his common-law wife, would be the one to inherit the $17 million. To execute her dark plan, Ina chose a highly insidious and quiet weapon, ethylene glycol, a toxic chemical commonly found in household automotive products like antifreeze and brake fluid. Ethylene glycol is particularly dangerous because it possesses a sweet taste, allowing it to be easily mixed into sweet beverages or beer without the victim realizing they are consuming a lethal poison. Furthermore, the early symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning are slow to develop and closely mimic other common conditions, such as severe alcohol intoxication or heat stroke. The victim initially experiences dizziness, confusion, nausea, and physical instability, which gradually escalates to severe organ failure over a period of 2 to 3 days. This slow progression allowed Ina to construct a deceptive narrative, attributing the physical decline of Stephen to the hot summer weather and his history of substance use. The tragic sequence of events began to accelerate in early September of the year 2023. On September 2nd, Stephen, Ina, and their close friend and former landlord, Wesley Torgerson, went to the airport to meet a British attorney who was supposedly arriving to finalize the inheritance paperwork. The lawyer, of course, did not show up, a classic tactic employed by international scammers to delay the process and extract more fees. While waiting at the airport, Stephen began to show severe signs of physical distress. He was unsteady on his feet and eventually fell over backward, landing on the concrete. Recognizing the severity of his condition, Wesley and his son Shannon desperately wanted to take Stephen to a medical clinic or hospital. Ina, however, was highly adamant that medical intervention was unnecessary, insisting that Stephen was merely suffering from heat stroke and only needed to return home to rest under her care. By insisting on taking Stephen back to their cluttered apartment, Ina was able to effectively isolate him, ensuring that no medical professionals could intervene and reverse the effects of the poison. On the morning of September 3rd, Wesley Torgerson drove to the apartment to check on the welfare of his friend. As he approached, he saw Ina standing outside with the door open. Upon recognizing his vehicle, Ina quickly retreated inside and slammed the door shut. When Wesley confronted her through the door, asking about the whereabouts of Stephen, Ina lied, claiming that Stephen had gone to a local walk-in medical clinic. Concerned for his friend, Wesley spent hours driving to every clinic in the small city of Minnow, only to find no record of Stephen ever checking in. When he returned to the apartment to demand answers, Ina refused to let him inside, slamming the door and completely shutting him out. Inside the apartment, Stephen was slowly dying, his organs failing one by one, while the woman he trusted ensured he remained far from help. It was not until the afternoon of September 4th, the year 2023, that Ina finally placed a call to the emergency services, reporting that Stephen was unresponsive on the bedroom floor. By this time, the poison had fully ravaged his body. When officers and medical staff arrived at the cluttered, trash-filled apartment, they found Stephen barely breathing, his physical state extremely poor. Ina told the responding officers that she had been trying to cool him down with an ice compress, continuing to push the false narrative of heat stroke. Due to the critical nature of his condition, Stephen was rushed to the local hospital and subsequently flown to a specialized intensive care unit in Bismarck, North Dakota. Over the course of the night, doctors fought valiantly to save him, but his body was in complete end organ failure. Stephen suffered multiple cardiac arrests and finally passed away on the morning of September 5th, the year 2023, at 8:32. Initially, because Stephen had a history of methamphetamine use and had tested positive for the substance upon admission, medical professionals and law enforcement believed his death was a tragic but natural event, a cardiac arrest brought on by substance use and physical exertion in the summer heat. There were no obvious outward signs of violence, and the case was nearly closed as a medical death. However, the intuition of a son and the dedication of medical professionals would soon change the course of the entire investigation. Ryan, the son of Stephen, had recently reconnected with his father after years of estrangement due to the struggles of his father Tehet addiction. Having just completed his military training, Ryan was devastated by the sudden news of the passing of his father. He refused to accept that a man who had survived so much could simply pass away so quickly from natural causes. Ryan immediately requested that an autopsy be performed, a decision that would prove to be the turning point of the case. Simultaneously, an intensive care physician in Bismarck, who had observed the unusual progression of the symptoms of Stephen, contacted the medical examiner to suggest testing specifically for ethylene glycol poisoning. When the toxicology report was completed, the results were shocking. The victim had a highly lethal dose of ethylene glycol in his system, measuring 33 milligrams per deciliter, far exceeding the typical lethal threshold of 20 milligrams per deciliter. The presence of this substance immediately transformed a suspected natural death into an active and urgent homicide investigation. The police department of Minnow, working alongside state investigators, began the painstaking process of tracking down the killer. In any homicide investigation, detectives must carefully analyze the initial clues and behaviors of those closest to the victim. Ina Kenoyer immediately made a significant tactical error. On the day after Stephen was hospitalized, she called 911 to report that a friend of Stephen, Billy Burkhead, had broken into their garage. She claimed Billy was trying to steal the truck of Stephen and voiced her strong suspicions that Billy was the one who had murdered Stephen. While a guilty party often attempts to deflect suspicion by pointing the finger at others, this action drew the immediate focus of investigators toward the dynamics of the relationships surrounding Stephen. During a search of the property, investigators discovered critical physical evidence. In the garage, they found 2-gallon jugs of antifreeze, one of which was completely empty, while the other was half full. More importantly, they located a beer bottle in the garage that was filled with a liquid, later confirmed to be antifreeze. Inside the home, on an end table next to the couch, they discovered an open Windex bottle filled with a vibrant neon green substance that was also identified as antifreeze. The unusual placement of an open bottle of toxic chemicals in the living space was a major red flag, suggesting that the poison had been kept readily accessible for administration. Detectives brought Billy Burkhead in for questioning to explore his relationship with Stephen and the allegations made by Ina. Billy was highly cooperative and explained that his entry into the garage was motivated solely by a desire to protect the truck of Stephen. He knew Stephen had been working on the vehicle as a special gift for his son Ryan, and he feared Ina would sell it for quick cash. Billy then provided investigators with vital information regarding the character and past actions of Ina. He recounted an incident from 2 years prior where Ina, in a fit of rage, had attempted to attack him with a large knife. He described her as a highly volatile and dangerous individual when she did not get her way. Most crucially, Billy revealed that a friend named Lynn had witnessed Ina joking about how easy it would be to poison both Billy and Stephen by putting antifreeze into their Gatorades, claiming they would never know the difference. This statement was incredibly significant, as it demonstrated that Ina had a pre-existing knowledge of ethylene glycol as a weapon, and had openly contemplated its use. The most definitive and damaging piece of evidence, however, came from the testimony of the upstairs neighbor, Rebecca Mello. Rebecca provided investigators with a detailed account of the deteriorating relationship between Stephen and Ina, confirming that Stephen had planned to use the $17 million inheritance to leave Ina permanently. She also described a conversation she had with Ina on the Sunday immediately following the hospitalization of Stephen. During this conversation, before any autopsy had been performed, before any toxicology tests had been run, and before anyone in the medical or law enforcement communities had even suspected foul play, Ina explicitly told Rebecca that Stephen had been poisoned with antifreeze. This was the classic slip of the tongue that often dooms sophisticated criminals. There was absolutely no way Ina could have known Stephen was suffering from ethylene glycol poisoning at that exact moment, unless she was the person who had administered it. Armed with this overwhelming circumstantial evidence, detectives conducted a final interview with Ina Kenoyer. They pressed her on the contradictions in her statements, particularly her claims that she had begged Stephen to seek medical help, which were flatly contradicted by the testimony of Wesley Torgerson. They also questioned her about the inheritance and her knowledge of the plans of Stephen to leave her. Ina initially tried to portray herself as indifferent to the wealth, claiming she believed the money was cursed. However, as the investigators laid out the discrepancies in her story, her calm demeanor completely shattered. She reacted ve kep ite, had explosive anger, yelling at the detectives before ultimately demanding an attorney, bringing the interview to an end. Although they did not secure a confession, the evidence compiled by the Minnow Police Department was incredibly strong. On October 30th, the year 2023, approximately 2 months after the death of Stephen, an arrest warrant was issued, and Ina Kenoyer was taken into custody and charged with Class A murder. As the legal case against Ina was being prepared, investigators made another tragic and shocking discovery. They obtained the email correspondence and paperwork regarding the $17 million inheritance that Stephen had believed in so deeply. Upon close examination, the fraudulent nature of the documents was painfully obvious. The letterhead was generic, the formatting was inconsistent, the name of Stephen was printed in a completely different font, and the emails originated from an unverified address. A representative from the Department of the Treasury confirmed that it was a classic advance fee inheritance scam, designed solely to steal personal identification information and money from unsuspecting victims. The moment Ina sent an email informing the scammers that Stephen had passed away, the email address was permanently deleted, leaving investigators at a dead end. The $17 million fortune that Stephen had hoped would change his family's life, and for which Ina had cold-bloodedly taken his life, was an absolute fabrication. Stephen had died over literally nothing. Faced with the mountain of evidence assembled by the prosecution, including the testimonies of her neighbors, the physical evidence found in her home, and her own self-incriminating statements, Ina Kenoyer chose to avoid a trial. In May of the year 2024, she and her defense attorney filed a motion to change her plea to guilty for the charge of murder. On October of that same year, she was sentenced to serve 25 years in state prison, followed by 10 years of probation. While the family of Stephen felt that 25 years was not a sufficient punishment for the calculated theft of a human life, they found solace in the fact that justice had been served and the truth had been revealed. This tragic case offers profound life lessons for communities everywhere. First and foremost, it serves as a stark reminder of the devastating reality of financial scams. In the digital age, fraudulent schemes have become highly sophisticated, targeting the hopes, dreams, and vulnerabilities of individuals who may be struggling financially. It is vital for citizens to maintain a high degree of skepticism regarding any unsolicited communications promising vast sums of money, unexpected inheritances, or lottery winnings from overseas. True financial security is never built on secret, unverified emails, and the verification of any such claims through legitimate legal and financial professionals is a crucial safeguard. Secondly, the tragedy highlights the critical importance of paying close attention to domestic dynamics and taking early warning signs of abuse or volatility seriously. The history of volatile behavior of Ina, including the knife incident described by Billy Burkhead, was a clear indicator of potential violence that went unaddressed. In relationships where substance abuse, mental health struggles, and financial desperation overlap, the potential for crisis is greatly magnified. Community members, friends, and family must feel empowered to speak up and seek help when they witness escalating tension or signs of control and isolation in a household. For law enforcement, the successful resolution of this case provides invaluable insights into how to handle complex domestic poisoning investigations. Poisoning is a historically difficult crime to detect because the physical symptoms often mimic natural illnesses, allowing perpetrators to hide their actions behind a mask of medical misfortune. To catch such perpetrators faster, investigators must rely on several key strategies. One essential approach is the rapid initiation of comprehensive toxicological testing in cases of sudden, unexplained organ failure, especially when the clinical presentation does not fully align with the medical history of the patient. The proactive recommendation of the treating physician in Bismarck to test for ethylene glycol was a critical catalyst that prevented this homicide from being misclassified as a natural death. Establishing protocols for early communication between medical staff and medical examiners can significantly accelerate the detection of foul play. Furthermore, this case underscores the power of behavioral analysis and immediate, comprehensive interviews with neighbors and associates. The slip of the tongue by Ina, where she revealed details of the poison before they were scientifically confirmed, is a common phenomenon in psychological profiling. Criminals often possess an overwhelming desire to control the narrative, which frequently leads them to share information they should not logically have. By conducting detailed, prompt interviews with individuals like Rebecca Mello and Wesley Torgerson, detectives were able to capture these inconsistencies before the suspect had time to refine her alibi. The memory of Stephen Riley remains cherished by his sisters, his sons, and his friends, who remember him not for his struggles or the tragic manner of his passing, but for his protective heart, his quick smile, and his willingness to help anyone in need. Through the diligent efforts of the Minot Police Department, the medical examiners, and the unwavering pursuit of truth by his son Ryan, the darkness of deception was brought into the light, ensuring that the ultimate victory belonged to justice and the memory of a beloved father, brother, and friend. The human heart is a complex vessel, capable of holding immense hope, yet equally vulnerable to the most devastating illusions. In the quiet landscapes of the Great Plains, where the horizon stretches indefinitely under an endless sky, life often moves at a predictable, steady pace. But beneath this calm exterior, the quiet desperation of individuals seeking a shortcut to a better life can sometimes cultivate a perfect storm of tragedy. It is within this fragile intersection of human desire, vulnerability, and deception that the story of Stephen Riley unfolds, serving as a sobering reminder of how easily the promise of sudden wealth can distort reality and dismantle the lives of everyone involved. When we analyze the motives behind crimes of this nature, we often find a recurring theme of profound isolation, coupled with the sudden temptation of financial salvation. In many modern criminal cases, the catalyst is not a well-thought-out plan born of professional criminal enterprise, but rather a sudden, desperate grab for kep. Ha-ta-te appears to be an easy escape from life's hardships. The tragedy that took place in Minot, North Dakota, in the late summer of 2023 represents a classic, albeit heartbreaking, example of how a fabricated fantasy can ignite very real and deadly human emotions. To understand how such a tragedy could occur, one must first look at the lives of the individuals involved and the paths that brought them together. Stephen Edward Riley, Jr. was born on August 25, 1972, in Palm Springs, California. His entry into the world was a fragile one, as he was born so premature that his parents feared he would not survive his initial days. Weighing a mere 4 pounds, his survival was considered a minor miracle, even earning him a brief mention in the local newspaper. This early battle for life seemed to instill in Stephen a resilient spirit. As he grew, he became a protective and comforting older brother to his 2 sisters, always seeking to ensure their safety and well-being. He was remembered by those who knew him in his youth as a warm, friendly individual with an infectious smile, someone who possessed a natural sense of humor and would gladly offer the shirt off his back to help a friend. Yet, like many who carry a gentle exterior, Stephen harbored personal struggles that he chose to keep hidden from the world. As the years progressed, he faced the emotional toll of 2 divorces and the challenge of raising 5 sons across his 2 marriages. The pressures of life, and perhaps an unspoken sadness, eventually led him toward a path of substance use, a struggle that alienated him from his family and eventually led to a period of incarceration and homelessness. It was during this low point, while residing in a local homeless shelter, that Stephen met Ina Thea Kenoyer. Born on May 27, 1976, in Bellingham, Washington, Ina had experienced her own share of childhood trauma and personal setbacks. After high school, she struggled to find stability, moving from job to job, and eventually finding herself in the same shelter as Stephen. Bound by their shared experience of having absolutely nothing, the two found solace in each other's company. They fell in love, and in 2011, they made the decision to relocate to North Dakota, seeking a fresh start in a region known for its industrious spirit and quiet communities. To the outside observer, they appeared to be a devoted couple. Stephen spent his hours working on vehicles in the garage, while Ina would bring him warm beverages and food, portraying the image of a supportive partner. But beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful domestic life, the foundations of their relationship were deeply fractured. Stephen began to feel suffocated by the relationship, describing his partner to close friends as unstable and difficult. Yet he remained out of a sense of obligation, fearing that if he left her, she would have no one and nothing to fall back on. This delicate balance of mutual dependence and hidden resentment was utterly shattered when Stephen fell victim to an incredibly sophisticated and deceptive email scam. For an individual who had struggled financially for most of his adult life, the sudden arrival of an email claiming that he was the rightful heir to a massive inheritance of $30 million was nothing short of a miracle. The email, purporting to come from a representative of a bank in Switzerland, detailed a vast fortune left behind by a distant, wealthy uncle residing in Ireland. To an objective observer, the email possessed numerous red flags, including inconsistent fonts, unusual capitalization, and requests for highly sensitive personal identification. Yet, to Stephen, who desperately wanted to believe that his days of struggle were finally over, the promise of this wealth became an absolute truth. He invested all his hopes into this digital mirage, planning the grand future he would build with his newfound fortune. He envisioned driving a restored truck down to Texas to establish a trust fund for his beloved sons, ensuring they would never have to experience the hardships he had endured. However, this imagined fortune did more than just promise financial security. It provided Stephen with the emotional leverage he needed to finally make a clean break from his relationship with Ina. He began sharing his intentions with those close to him, confidentially revealing that once the inheritance cleared, he would finally leave her. He reasoned that with $30 million, he could easily purchase an apartment for Ina, ensuring she was cared for, thereby absolving himself of the guilt of leaving her with nothing. But as is so often the case in tightly knit domestic environments, secrets are incredibly difficult to keep. It is highly probable that Ina caught wind of these conversations, perhaps overhearing Stephen speaking in the garage or discovering his plans through mutual acquaintances. The realization that Stephen was planning to exit her life the moment he became wealthy triggered a toxic mixture of resentment, fear, and profound greed. Under North Dakota law, common law marriage is not legally recognized, meaning Ina would have no automatic legal claim to Stephen's anticipated millions if he chose to walk away. In her deeply flawed logic, she concluded that the only way to secure a share of this immense fortune was to ensure that Stephen remained with her permanently, or Failing that, to ensure he did not live to leave her behind, believing that as his common-law wife, she would inherit his estate upon his passing. The tragedy began to unfold in earnest during the first week of September 2023. Stephen received a communication from the scammer, directing him to meet with a British attorney at the Minot International Airport on September 3rd to finalize the paperwork and secure the release of the $30 million. Accompanied by Ina and several close friends, including his former landlord Wesley Torgerson, Stephen arrived at the airport, his anticipation at an all-time high. But as they waited in the terminal, the promised attorney failed to appear. The hours passed, and instead of receiving his life-changing fortune, Stephen's physical health began to rapidly and mysteriously decline. He began to stumble, complain of severe stomach pain, and act as though he were heavily intoxicated, despite not having consumed any alcohol that day. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, his friends grew deeply concerned and repeatedly urged that he be taken to a medical clinic for an immediate evaluation. But Ina was incredibly adamant in her opposition, dismissing their concerns and insisting that Stephen was merely suffering from heat stroke due to his recent work in the warm garage. She assured the group that she would take him back to their apartment, apply cool compresses, and nurse him back to health. Yielding to her declarations, the friends allowed Ina to take Stephen home. Throughout the evening and into the following morning, Stephen's condition continued to deteriorate as the poison silently ravaged his internal organs. On the morning of September 4th, a deeply concerned Wesley Torgerson drove to the apartment to check on his friend. As he approached, he observed Ina standing outside. Upon recognizing his vehicle, Ina quickly retreated inside and shut the door. When Wesley confronted her and demanded to see Stephen, Ina lied, claiming that Stephen had already left to seek treatment at a local walk-in clinic. Suspicious, but wanting to believe her, Wesley spent the next several hours driving to every medical clinic and emergency room in the city of Minot, only to find no record of Stephen ever checking in. When Wesley returned to the apartment to confront her about this massive lie, Ina refused to let him inside, slamming the door and effectively isolating Stephen from any potential lifelines during his final critical hours of survival. It was only when Stephen's breathing became shallow and he fell completely unresponsive onto the bedroom floor that Ina finally contacted emergency services, placing a call to the Minot Central Dispatch on the afternoon of September 4th. When police officers and medical personnel arrived at the cluttered, trash-filled apartment, they found Stephen in an extremely critical state. Ina calmly reiterated her narrative, claiming that Stephen had suffered heat stroke while working on his truck the previous day, and that she had tried to cool him down with ice packs before he fell from the bed. The paramedics quickly realized the severity of the situation. Stephen was rushed to the local hospital, but his condition was so advanced that he required immediate placement in an intensive care unit. Because there were no available beds in Minot, he was airlifted to a larger medical facility in Bismarck, North Dakota. Despite the tireless efforts of the medical staff, Stephen suffered multiple cardiac arrests as his vital organs shut down. At 8:32 on the morning of September 5th, 2023, Stephen passed away, leaving his family devastated and bewildered by his sudden demise. Initially, because of Stephen's history of substance use and the positive test for methamphetamines in his system, medical authorities believed his death was likely a natural cardiac event exacerbated by substance history and potential heat exhaustion. There were no immediate signs of physical violence or trauma that would warrant a criminal investigation. But Stephen's son, Ryan, who had recently reconnected with his father after years of estrangement, refused to believe that his father had passed away so easily. Driven by a powerful intuition and a deep love for his father, Ryan requested a comprehensive autopsy and immediately contacted the Minot Police Department to request the opening of a formal investigation. This crucial step proved to be the turning point in the case. An astute intensive care physician in Bismarck, noting the specific manner in which Stephen's organs had failed, suggested that the medical examiner perform a toxicology screen specifically for ethylene glycol, a highly toxic chemical commonly found in household automotive products such as antifreeze and brake fluid. When the toxicology results were returned, they confirmed the family's worst fears and provided the police with undeniable evidence of a homicide. The typical lethal concentration of ethylene glycol in the human body is approximately 20 milligrams per deciliter. Stephen's system contained an astonishing 33 milligrams per deciliter, a clearly lethal dose that explained the rapid and agonizing failure of his organs. Armed with this scientific proof, the Minot Police Department officially launched a murder investigation. The challenges of tracking down a poisoner are notorious in criminal history, as poison is often chosen precisely because it can mimic natural illnesses and leaves no outward physical signs of struggle. However, the detectives assigned to the case began by carefully reconstructing the final days of Stephen's life, focusing on those who had direct access to him and a potential motive to cause him harm. The investigation quickly centered on the physical environment of the residence. A comprehensive search of the property yielded several critical items that pointed directly to the source of the lethal chemical. In the garage, where Stephen spent much of his time, investigators discovered 2-gallon jugs of antifreeze, one of which was completely empty, while the other was half full. More alarmingly, they found a beer bottle that had been filled with a green substance later confirmed to be antifreeze. Inside the living quarters, resting openly on an end table next to the couch, sat an uncapped plastic window cleaner bottle. Instead of containing blue glass cleaner, the bottle was filled with a bright neon green fluid that matched the appearance of automotive antifreeze. The placement of this bottle, open and easily accessible, suggested a highly unusual and careless handling of a deadly poison within a residential space. As the police began interviewing key individuals, a complex web of accusations and psychological deflections began to emerge. Shortly after Stephen's death, Ina had contacted the police to report that Stephen's close friend, Billy Burkhead, had broken into the garage in an attempt to steal Stephen's truck. Ina openly voiced her suspicion that Billy was the one who had murdered Stephen, suggesting that he had returned to the property to destroy or retrieve a murder weapon or vessel used to administer the poison. This deflection is a common psychological tactic employed by guilty individuals who often believe that by aggressively pointing the finger at someone else, they can direct suspicion away from themselves. However, when detectives brought Billy Burkhead in for voluntary questioning, they found a cooperative individual whose actions were motivated by a genuine desire to protect Stephen's possessions for his son Ryan. During his interview, Billy provided investigators with crucial insights into Ina, volatile personality, and her history of erratic behavior. He recounted a terrifying incident from 2 years prior, where Ina had allegedly approached him with a large knife, attempting to stab him without any apparent provocation, an attack that was only stopped when a mutual friend intervened. More importantly, Billy revealed a highly disturbing conversation that had taken place between Ina and another friend named Lynn. According to Billy, Ina had openly joked about her frustration. Vekip, Itehat, both Stephen and Billy, suggesting that she could easily resolve her problems by putting antifreeze into their sports drinks, confident that they would never be able to tell the difference. This detail was incredibly significant to the investigators, as it demonstrated that Ina possessed prior knowledge of how to administer ethylene glycol as a tasteless, odorless poison and had openly contemplated using it against the victim. The physical and circumstantial evidence against Ina continued to mount as detectives interviewed the upstairs neighbor, Rebecca Mello. Rebecca provided a detailed account of the deteriorating relationship between Stephen and Ina, noting that while Ina frequently claimed they were husband and wife, Stephen openly disputed this, stating they were not married, and that he only stayed to prevent her from becoming homeless. Rebecca confirmed that Stephen had expressed a clear intention to use his anticipated inheritance to secure an apartment for Ina and permanently end their relationship. Most critically, Rebecca recounted a highly suspicious conversation she had with Ina on the Sunday immediately following Stephen Seth's admission to the hospital. According to Rebecca, Ina had openly declared that Stephen had been poisoned with antifreeze, pointing the finger at Billy and his friends. This statement was made a full 2 days before the toxicology reports were completed and before any medical professional or law enforcement officer had even suspected poisoning. To the investigators, this was the ultimate slip-up. There was no plausible way for Ina to know that Stephen had been poisoned with ethylene glycol unless she was the one who had administered it. When detectives finally brought Ina in for her formal interview, they observed a striking contrast between her self-serving narratives and the verified facts of the case. She claimed that she had desperately begged Stephen to seek medical attention, a claim flatly contradicted by multiple witnesses who had witnessed her actively preventing Stephen from going to the clinic. She denied any interest in the $30 million inheritance, even offering a bizarre explanation that she believed the inheritance was cursed because previous heirs had mysteriously passed away. However, when investigators confronted her with the numerous contradictions in her statements, her calm facade completely collapsed. She erupted in a fit of anger, shouting at the detectives before demanding legal representation, bringing the interview to an abrupt end. While investigators were confident in her guilt, they chose to proceed with meticulous care, wanting to ensure they had an ironclad case before making an arrest. Over the next 2 months, they compiled their evidence, ultimately securing a signed arrest warrant for murder. On October 30th, 2023, Ina Thea Kenoyer was placed under arrest and charged with Class AA felony murder, the most severe homicide charge under North Dakota law. But as the legal process moved forward, investigators uncovered the ultimate, tragic irony of the entire case. The $30 million inheritance that had served as the sole motive for this horrific crime was a complete fabrication. The emails Stephen had received were part of a coordinated international phishing scam designed to steal his personal information and financial assets. There was no wealthy uncle in Ireland, no bank account in Switzerland, and not a single dollar to be inherited. Stephen had lost his life, and Ina had destroyed her future over absolutely nothing. Facing the overwhelming weight of the physical evidence, the testimony of neighbors and friends, and the undeniable toxicology results, Ina and her legal counsel recognized the futility of proceeding to a full jury trial. In May of 2024, she entered a change of plea, officially pleading guilty to the charge of Class AA felony murder. 5 months later, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by 10 years of supervised probation. The resolution of this case brought a sense of closure to Stephen S. family, particularly his son Ryan, who had championed the search for truth from the very beginning. Yet, the tragedy leaves behind profound lessons for communities everywhere regarding the dangers of unchecked greed, the vulnerability of individuals to modern digital scams, and the critical importance of recognizing the warning signs of domestic control. When we reflect on this case, we can draw valuable insights into how such tragedies can be prevented and how law enforcement can work more efficiently to bring perpetrators to justice. First, the case highlights the extreme danger of financial scams and the need for greater community education. Individuals who are struggling financially are often the most vulnerable to these elaborate deceptions, as the promise of a sudden windfall can impair their logical judgment and cause them to ignore glaring warning signs. Families and friends must remain vigilant, encouraging open communication about financial matters and helping loved ones verify the legitimacy of any unexpected claims of wealth. Second, the tragedy underscores the importance of taking domestic threats and erratic behavior seriously. The prior incidents involving Ina's volatile behavior and her comments about poisoning should have been red flags. Promoting a culture where individuals feel safe reporting such concerning behavior to authorities can help prevent violence before it escalates to a lethal level. For law enforcement, this case offers excellent examples of how rapid, coordinated action can successfully resolve complex poisoning investigations. The speed with which Stephen S. son requested an autopsy, combined with the medical staff's prompt suggestion to test for ethylene glycol, was absolutely critical. In cases of suspected poisoning, time is of the essence, as toxic substances can quickly metabolize and become difficult to detect. Establishing standardized protocols where hospitals and police departments maintain open channels of communication regarding unusual, rapid-onset organ failure can significantly speed up the detection of foul play. Additionally, the meticulous collection of physical evidence from the scene, particularly everyday household items that may contain disguised toxic substances, remains a cornerstone of successful prosecution. By focusing on the psychological elements, the timeline of events, and the digital footprints of both the victim and the suspect, investigators were able to build a cohesive narrative that left the perpetrator with no choice but to admit her guilt. In the end, justice prevailed, honoring the memory of Stephen Riley and offering a somber, educational warning to the world about the devastating cost of a life built on greed and illusion. The human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity to construct elaborate castles in the air, but when those castles are built on the shifting sands of greed and digital deception, the descent into tragedy can be both swift and absolute. In the quiet community of Minot, North Dakota, a place where neighbors generally look out for one another, and the pace of life reflects the steady endurance of the northern plains, a drama unfolded that serves as a chilling testament to the destructive power of phantom wealth. The story of Stephen Edward Riley, Jr. is not merely a tale of a life prematurely taken, but a profound study of how a modern financial illusion can trigger the most primitive and desperate of human instincts. It is a narrative that highlights the quiet, diligent work of law enforcement officers who refused to accept a convenient explanation, the emotional resilience of a grieving family, and the ultimate, hollow victory of justice over a crime motivated by literally nothing. To understand the tragedy that culminated in September of 2023, one must first understand the man at the center of this storm. Stephen Riley, Jr., born on August 25, 1972, in Palm Springs, California, was a man whose very survival moth birth was deemed a minor miracle. Entering the world prematurely at a mere 4 pounds, he was so tiny that his birth made the local newspaper, earning him the affectionate status of a miracle baby among his loved ones. He grew up to be a protective older brother to his 2 sisters, adopting a comforting, natural leadership role that prioritized the safety of his family. As he moved into adulthood, Stephen possessed an easygoing charm, a quick smile, and a passion for working on cars, particularly classic models like his beloved Camaro, whose transmission he and his friends replaced multiple times. He was the kind of person who would readily offer the shirt off his back to anyone in need, a hard-working construction worker who sought joy in the simple, mechanical rhythms of life. Yet, like many who work hard to navigate the complexities of modern existence, Stephen faced personal challenges. By the time he reached the age of 40, he had experienced the pain of 2 divorces and struggled with the heavy burden of substance abuse, including alcohol and methamphetamine. These struggles created temporary rifts in his family, leading to periods of estrangement from his children, and even a time spent in a local homeless shelter. It was during this vulnerable chapter of his life, while trying to rebuild his footing, that he met Ina Thea Kenoyer. Born on May 27, 1976, Ina had also experienced a difficult childhood and a series of personal setbacks after high school, which eventually led her to the same shelter. Bound by a shared experience of having absolutely nothing, the two found solace in each other, fell in love, and in 2011 made the decision to relocate to North Dakota to start anew. To the casual observer in Minnow, they appeared to be a standard, happy couple, with Stephen spending hours fixing vehicles in the garage, while Ina supported his endeavors, bringing him coffee and sharing in their modest daily routine. The trajectory of their lives altered dramatically when Stephen became the target of an elaborate advance fee email scam. In the vast and often hazardous digital wilderness, messages frequently arrive promising unexpected fortunes, but to a man who had spent decades performing back-breaking labor, an email claiming he was the sole heir to a vast inheritance of $17 million from a long-lost uncle in Ireland felt like a divine intervention. To some, the promise of such an astronomical sum would immediately trigger skepticism. But for Stephen, it represented the ultimate redemption. He poured his entire belief, his hopes, and his future plans into this digital mirage. He began speaking enthusiastically to his friends and family about the windfall, explaining how he would finally buy a home, open his own automotive repair shop, and, most importantly, distribute the wealth among his 5 sons to secure their financial futures. However, this spectacular promise harbored a fatal paradox. As Stephen prepared to step into his imagined future of immense wealth, he began to realize that this new chapter did not have room for the relationship that had defined his leanest years. He confided in close friends and neighbors that once the $17 million arrived, he intended to leave Ina. He expressed a desire to handle the separation gently, planning to use a portion of his inheritance to purchase an apartment and establish a financial safety net for her, so she would not be left homeless. But his romantic commitment to her had reached its end. Unfortunately, in the close quarters of their shared apartment, these plans did not remain secret. Ina allegedly overheard Stephen's intentions, and the realization that she was about to be discarded just as the golden gates of unlimited wealth were opening triggered a toxic cocktail of resentment, panic, and greed. The lethal plan began to materialize in the days leading up to September 3rd, 2023. On that warm Sunday, Stephen was highly anxious and excited, believing he was finally scheduled to meet a British attorney at the Minot International Airport to finalize the paperwork and receive his multi-million-dollar inheritance. Accompanied by Ina and his close friends, Wesley and Shannon Torgerson, Stephen arrived at the airport, his mind occupied by the brilliant future awaiting him. Yet, as they waited in the terminal, the attorney never arrived, and Stephen's physical condition began to deteriorate rapidly. He started complaining of severe physical discomfort, stumbling, and showing signs of extreme lethargy, appearing to be highly intoxicated despite not having consumed alcohol that day. While Stephen's friends became deeply concerned and insisted that he be taken immediately to a medical clinic, Ina was remarkably adamant in her resistance. She repeatedly downplayed his obvious distress, insisting that he was merely suffering from heat stroke due to his recent outdoor work on his truck. She claimed that all he needed was rest, and that she would personally care for him back at their apartment. Trusting her role as his longtime partner, the friends reluctantly agreed to transport him back to the residence. The following morning, when a concerned Wesley Torgerson returned to the apartment to check on his friend S' condition, Ina's behavior grew increasingly evasive. She met him outside, and upon recognizing his vehicle, quickly retreated into the house, slamming the door. When confronted, she falsely claimed that Stephen had gone to a local walk-in clinic. Wesley spent hours driving to every medical facility and emergency room in Minot, only to find no record of Stephen ever being admitted. When he returned to confront her, Ina locked him out entirely, systematically preventing any outside intervention while Stephen lay dying inside the apartment. It was not until the morning of September 4th, 2023, when Stephen's body was already entering the final irreversible stages of systemic failure, that Ina finally placed a call to the emergency services line. Responding officers and medical personnel arrived at a highly cluttered apartment, filled with trash and piles of clothing. Finding Stephen unresponsive on the bedroom floor, fighting for every breath, Ina maintained her cover story, telling the officers that Stephen had worked in the heat the previous day and had suffered a heat stroke, adding that she had tried to cool him down with ice compresses and that he had fallen off the bed. The severity of his condition was immediately apparent to the paramedics, who rushed him to the local hospital. Because the facility lacked open beds in its intensive care unit, Stephen was flown via air ambulance to a larger medical center in Bismarck. Despite the tireless efforts of the medical staff, who worked repeatedly to revive him during multiple cardiac arrests, Stephen's organs began to shut down one by one. On September 5, 2023, at 8:32 in the morning, Stephen Riley Jr. passed away. Initially, the circumstances of Stephen's death did not immediately point to criminal activity. Given his known history of substance use and the presence of methamphetamines in his system, initial medical assessments suggested that he had succumbed to a natural cardiac event, severely compounded by his history of drug use and the physical strain of the summer heat. There were no obvious signs of physical trauma or struggle, and it appeared that his death would be ruled a sad but non-criminal medical tragedy. However, the intuition of those who loved him and the astute observation of a medical professional intervened to alter the course of justice. Stephen N.'s Ryan, who had recently reconnected with his father after years of estrangement, refused to believe that his father could pass away so suddenly and easily. Sensing that something was profoundly wrong, Ryan requested a full autopsy from the hospital and immediately contacted the Minot Police Department to open an active investigation. Simultaneously, an intensive care unit physician who had treated Stephen in Bismarck experienced a crucial hunch based on the specific clinical symptoms of his organ failure. She suggested that the medical examiner specifically test for the presence of ethylene glycol, an incredibly toxic chemical compound. Ethylene glycol is a sweet-tasting, odorless liquid most commonly found in automotive antifreeze, coolants, and brake fluids. When ingested, it undergoes a metabolic process within the human body, transforming into highly toxic compounds that crystallize and rapidly destroy kidney tissue, leading to profound metabolic acidosis and systemic organ failure over an agonizing period of 2 to 3 days. Because of its sweet flavor, it can easily be disguised in sweet beverages, such as sweet tea or fruit juices, making it an historically notorious weapon for poisoners who assume its effects will be mistaken for sudden natural illness. The toxicology report from the medical examiner confirmed the physician's dark suspicion. Stephen had a highly lethal concentration of ethylene glycol in his system. While a typical lethal level is approximately 20 milligrams per deciliter, Stephen's blood revealed a massive concentration of 33 milligrams per deciliter. This scientific revelation transformed a suspected medical episode into an active homicide investigation. As detectives began to piece together the final days of Stephen's life, they quickly realized that the primary suspect had already begun a clumsy campaign of deflection. On September 5th, the very day Stephen died, Ina had placed a call to law enforcement alleging that Stephen's friend, Billy Burkhead, had broken into their garage in an attempt to steal Stephen's truck. Furthermore, she openly voiced her suspicions that Billy was the one who had murdered Stephen. From an analytical perspective, this premature accusation represents a classic psychological loophole in criminal behavior. The desperate urge to deflect attention by pointing a finger at an associate, inadvertently placing oneself directly in the center of the investigative spotlight. When detectives searched the property, they discovered a wealth of physical evidence that shattered any notions of a sophisticated crime. In the garage, they located 2 one-gallon jugs of antifreeze. One was entirely empty, while the other was half full. More alarmingly, they found a beer bottle in the garage that was filled with a substance chemically matching the antifreeze. Inside the residence, resting openly on an end table next to the living room couch, sat an open Windex glass cleaner bottle, completely devoid of its original blue cleaner, and instead filled with a bright neon green fluid that investigators identified as antifreeze. The careless placement of such a lethal substance in an open, easily tipped container within the living room spoke volumes about the perpetrator's complete lack of forensic awareness and utter disregard for safety. To resolve the competing accusations, detectives brought Billy Burkhead in for formal questioning. Billy proved to be entirely cooperative, explaining that his presence at the garage was motivated by a genuine concern that Ina would hastily sell the truck Stephen had been lovingly restoring as a gift for his son, Ryan. Billy then provided investigators with a crucial psychological profile of Ina, describing her as highly volatile and prone to extreme anger when she did not get her way. He recounted an incident from 2 years prior, where Ina had emerged from the residence with a large knife and attempted to stab him while he was working on a vehicle. Most significantly, Billy directed detectives to a mutual acquaintance named Lynn, who revealed a highly chilling conversation. Weeks prior, while joking about the frustrations of managing the men in their lives, Ina had casually suggested that they could easily eliminate their troubles by slipping antifreeze into the Gatorade bottles of both Billy and Stephen, confidently asserting that they would never be able to tell the difference due to the sweet taste. This statement provided investigators with a crucial link regarding the method of administration. But the most devastating blow to Ina's defense came from the testimony of their upstairs neighbor, Rebecca Mello. Rebecca, who met with Stephen's son Ryan upon his arrival in town, could no longer contain the dark suspicions she had harbored since the weekend of Stephen's collapse. She revealed that Stephen had explicitly told her of his plans to leave Ina once his inheritance was finalized, expressing a desire to escape what he described as her highly volatile behavior. Rebecca then recounted a conversation she had with Ina on Sunday, shortly after the ambulance had transported an unresponsive Stephen to the hospital. Ina had leaned in and confidently declared to Rebecca that Stephen had been poisoned with antifreeze by Billy and his friends. To a seasoned homicide investigator, this statement was the ultimate slip of the tongue. On Sunday afternoon, Stephen was still alive, fighting for his life in an intensive care unit. The doctors had not yet diagnosed the poisoning. The toxicology tests had not even been ordered, and the police were completely unaware that any crime had occurred. For Ina to name the exact highly specific chemical agent responsible for his illness, hours after his hospitalization, was a logical impossibility, unless she was the person who had administered the poison. Her attempt to frame Billy Burkhead had completely backfired, providing the police with the definitive timeline of her own guilt. Armed with this overwhelming circumstantial and physical evidence, detectives moved to interview Ina. Throughout the interrogation, she attempted to maintain a facade of innocence, portraying herself as a devoted partner who had begged Stephen to seek medical attention. When confronted with the glaring contradictions in her story, including Wesley Torgerson's testimony that she had lied about Stephen being at a walk-in clinic and locked him out of the house, Ina's composure completely dissolved. She launched into an explosive tirade of anger and denial, a defensive reaction common among perpetrators who realize that their carefully constructed lies have utterly collapsed under the weight of logical inquiry. Realizing she had reached a dead end, she demanded legal representation, bringing the interview to a close. As detectives prepared the formal charges with the state attorney's office, they undertook a thorough investigation into the heart of the motive, the $17 million inheritance. What they discovered added a profound layer of tragic irony to the entire case. Upon reviewing the email correspondence and documents Stephen had received, investigators quickly identified them as a completely fraudulent advance fee scam. The letters, supposedly originating from a prominent financial institution in Switzerland, were printed on generic paper, featured inconsistent fonts, displayed numerous grammatical and capitalization errors, and were sent from temporary email accounts. The individual communicating under the pseudonym Richard had spent months grooming Stephen, exploiting his financial desperation, and requesting highly sensitive personal information and small upfront fees to secure the mythical windfall. The moment Ina emailed the scammers to inform them that Stephen had passed away, the email address was instantly deactivated, rejecting all subsequent messages. The entire $17 million fortune was an absolute fiction, a digital ghost that had cost a good-hearted construction worker his life. Ina had meticulously planned and executed the cold-blooded murder of her partner of 12 years to secure a share of a fortune that did not contain a single real cent. She had operates under the mistaken belief that as his common-law wife, she would be legally entitled to a massive portion of the estate, entirely unaware that the state of North Dakota does not recognize common-law marriages, and that even if the money had been real, she would have had no legal claim to it. On October 30th, 2023, North Dakota law enforcement officially arrested Ina Thea Kenoyer, charging her with Class AA felony murder. Although the case rested largely on a powerful web of circumstantial evidence, the scientific proof of the antifreeze, the physical evidence in the home, the testimonies of the neighbors and friends, and her own self-incriminating statements created an insurmountable barrier for the defense. In May of 2024, rather than facing a jury of her peers, Ina entered a guilty plea to the charge of murder. 5 months later, she was sentenced to serve 25 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation. From this heartbreaking and senseless crime, several profound life lessons emerge that can help communities prevent such tragedies. First, it highlights the extreme danger of digital financial scams and the critical need for media literacy and community education. The vulnerability that led Stephen to believe in a $30 million or $17 million email is shared by millions of individuals who feel economically marginalized. When families and communities maintain open, non-judgmental communication about financial realities, individuals are far less likely to fall prey to predatory online actors. Seeking professional verification from legitimate legal or financial advisors before acting on exceptional claims can completely dismantle the illusions that scammers rely upon. Second, the case serves as a stark warning regarding the dynamics of domestic control and isolation. When a partner actively prevents an individual from seeking medical care, isolates them from concerned friends, and displays erratic, aggressive behavior, these are not merely relationship difficulties. They are significant warning signs of potential danger. Encouraging individuals to maintain robust networks of friends, family, and neighbors ensures that there are always external eyes capable of intervening when a situation turns dark. For law enforcement agencies, this case offers invaluable insights into optimizing the speed and accuracy of homicide investigations involving poison. The rapid resolution of Stephen S. case was entirely dependent on two critical factors: the swift insistence of his family on a comprehensive autopsy and the clinical curiosity of the treating medical team. In cases of sudden, rapid decline where symptoms resemble common medical emergencies like heat stroke or cardiovascular collapse, police forces can benefit immensely from establishing direct, rapid communication protocols with regional hospitals. Training first responders to recognize the subtle physical signs of environmental or chemical toxicity and advocating for early, specialized toxicological screenings in cases of unexplained organ failure can save critical days in securing volatile physical evidence before it can be destroyed. Furthermore, the meticulous documentation of witness statements in the immediate aftermath of an incident often captures the premature disclosures and timeline contradictions that ultimately dismantle a suspect's alibi. In the end, the memory of Stephen Riley Jr. is honored not by the sensationalism of his tragic passing, but by the dedication of his son Ryan, the integrity of his friends who stood up for the truth, and the professionalism of the investigators who uncovered the facts. Stephen's legacy remains that of a hard-working, generous man who loved his family, worked with his hands, and wished to leave a positive impact on those around him. While the gold he chased turned out to be nothing but dust and digital deceit, the triumph of justice in his name stands as a real, enduring testament to the victory of light over the darkest corners of human greed. The human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity to construct elaborate realities out of thin air, particularly when driven by the powerful forces of hope, desperation, and greed. In the quiet city of Minot, North Dakota, this psychological phenomenon materialized in a tragedy so profound that it serves as a stark warning about the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of unchecked avarice. The case of Stephen Riley, a man who lost his life over a completely fabricated fortune of $17 million, is not merely a story of domestic homicide. It is a complex sociological and psychological puzzle that exposes the intersections of modern cyber fraud, substance dependency, childhood trauma, and the ultimate failure of empathy. By examining the intricate details of this case, from the initial emergency call to the final courtroom sentencing, we can begin to understand the dark mechanisms of human behavior and the precise, logical methods employed by law enforcement to bring a killer to justice. On the afternoon of September 4, 2023, the tranquility of Minot Central Dispatch was interrupted by a phone call from a woman named Kenoyer. Her voice conveyed a sense of urgent panic as she reported that her longtime partner, Stephen Riley, was critically ill in their apartment. According to her initial report, Stephen had suffered from severe heat stroke the previous day while working on a vehicle in the summer sun, and he was now unresponsive on the bedroom floor, breathing abnormally. First responders, including local police officers and emergency medical staff, were immediately dispatched to the residence to evaluate the situation. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by an environment that spoke volumes about the chaotic lives of the occupants. The apartment was heavily cluttered, filled with trash, piles of clothing, and scattered household items that forced the emergency personnel to navigate carefully to reach the back of the home. In the master bedroom, officers found 51-year-old Stephen Riley lying on the floor, barely conscious and struggling to draw breath. When questioned about whether Stephen had ingested any dangerous substances, Kenoyer adamantly denied any drug use, claiming instead that his state was entirely due to heat exhaustion and the consumption of beer the day prior. She explained to the officers that she had attempted to alleviate his symptoms by applying ice compresses to his body and trying to lift him onto the bed, from which he had subsequently fallen. To the responding's medical team, the situation appeared to be a severe medical emergency, possibly compounded by environmental factors and physical strain. Stephen was immediately transported to the local hospital, but his condition was so critical that the facility could not provide the level of care he required. With no intensive care unit beds available in Minot, Stephen was airlifted to a larger medical center in Bismarck, North Dakota, where a team of specialized doctors began a desperate fight to save his life. Despite the tireless efforts of the medical staff in Bismarck, Stephen Riley experienced multiple cardiac arrests as his vital organs rapidly shut down. The clinical picture was baffling and tragic. A man who had been active just days before was now in the final stages of multi-organ failure. On the morning of September 5th, 2023, at 8:32, Stephen was pronounced dead. Because of his history of substance use, and because preliminary medical screens indicated the presence of amphetamines in his system, initial assessments leaned toward a natural, albeit drug-complicated, cardiac event. There were no immediate physical signs of violence or struggle, and the death appeared to be a tragic consequence of a difficult lifestyle. However, the human element of justice is often initiated by the persistence of those who refuse to accept simple explanations. Stephen S. son Ryan, who had recently reconnected with his father after years of estrangement due to family difficulties, felt an immediate sense of unease. He knew his father was a resilient survivor who had overcome significant physical adversity from the very moment of his premature birth on August 25, 1972. When he weighed a mere 4 pounds, Ryan could not accept that his father had passed away so suddenly from heat stroke or a simple cardiac event. Driven by this deep-seated intuition, Ryan requested that the hospital perform a comprehensive autopsy, a decision that would ultimately transform a routine medical tragedy into a high-stakes homicide investigation. The turning point in the investigation came from the brilliant clinical suspicion of one of the intensive care unit physicians in Bismarck. Observing the specific pattern of Stephen S. organ failure and metabolic acidosis, the doctors suggested that the toxicology screen include a test for ethylene glycol, a highly toxic chemical compound most commonly found in automotive antifreeze and brake fluid. When the toxicology results returned from the medical examiner, the findings were shocking. Stephen Riley had a concentration of 33 milligrams per deciliter of ethylene glycol in his system. Given that a concentration of 20 milligrams per deciliter is typically considered highly lethal to the human body, it was clear that Stephen had ingested a massive, fatal dose of the substance. Ethylene glycol poisoning is a particularly cruel method of elimination. It causes a slow, agonizing decline over a period of 2 to 3 days, systematically destroying the kidneys, heart, and brain as the body metabolizes the chemical into toxic oxalic acid crystals. With the confirmation of a lethal chemical in the victim's system, the Minot Police Department officially initiated a homicide investigation. The immediate challenge for detectives was to determine how the poison had been administered and who had the motive and opportunity to do so. In any domestic poisoning case, the closest associates of the victim are naturally scrutinized. In this instance, 2 primary individuals emerged as figures of interest: Stephen S. girlfriend, Ina Kenoyer, and his close friend, Billy Burkhead. The relationship between Ina and Stephen was deeply complex, rooted in a shared history of hardship. The two had met in a homeless shelter years earlier, bonding over their mutual struggles. Vekepine to hot poverty and instability. In 2011, they had relocated to North Dakota, seeking a fresh start. To outward observers, they appeared to be a dedicated couple, with Ina frequently bringing Stephen coffee while he worked on vehicles in their garage. Yet, beneath this placid exterior lay deep-seated tensions. The first major lead in the investigation arose from a highly suspicious incident reported by Ina Kenoyer herself. On September 5th, the very day Stephen passed away, Ina contacted the police to report that Billy Burkhead had broken into their garage in an attempt to steal Stephen's truck. Furthermore, she openly accused Billy of being responsible for Stephen's death. From an investigative perspective, this rapid finger-pointing was highly significant. While it was possible that Billy was a genuine suspect, it was equally possible that Ina was attempting to orchestrate a diversion to deflect suspicion away from herself. When detectives searched the garage and the residence, they discovered physical evidence that lent weight to both possibilities. Inside the garage, investigators found 2 gallon-sized jugs of antifreeze, one entirely empty and the other approximately half full. More alarmingly, they discovered a beer bottle in the garage that was filled with a bright green liquid resembling antifreeze. Inside the home, sitting openly on a living room end table, was a glass cleaner bottle without its cap, containing the same distinctive neon green fluid. When detectives brought Billy Burkhead in for questioning, they found him to be highly cooperative and transparent. Billy explained that his presence at the garage was motivated solely by a desire to protect Stephen S. Truck. He knew that Stephen had been meticulously restoring the vehicle as a gift for his son, Ryan, and Billy feared that Ina would quickly sell the truck for personal gain. When asked about his relationship with the couple, Billy painted a dark picture of Ina Kenoyer's temperament. He recounted a terrifying incident from 2 years prior, where Ina had allegedly emerged from the house with a large knife and attempted to stab him while he was working on a vehicle. Billy's most critical contribution to the investigation, however, was his recollection of a conversation involving a mutual acquaintance named Lynn. According to Billy, Lynn had mentioned that Ina had previously joked about how easy it would be to eliminate both Billy and Stephen by simply mixing antifreeze into their sports drinks, confident that they would never notice the sweet taste of the chemical. This reference to a sports drink as a delivery vehicle for poison aligned perfectly with the toxicological evidence, as ethylene glycol possesses a naturally sweet flavor that can easily be masked in sugary beverages. The focus of the investigation began to shift heavily toward Ina Kenoyer, a transition that was further solidified by the testimonies of neighbors and friends. Rebecca Mello, the couple's upstairs neighbor, provided crucial insights into the psychological dynamics of the household. Rebecca described Ina as a deeply troubled individual who had suffered extensive childhood trauma, which she had never properly processed or sought help for. Over time, these unresolved psychological issues had placed an immense strain on her relationship with Stephen. Although Ina insisted to others that they were husband and wife, Stephen had privately confided in Rebecca that they were not married and that he felt trapped in the relationship, staying only out of a sense of obligation, because he feared Ina would have absolutely no support if he left her. The landscape of their relationship shifted dramatically in the weeks leading up to September 2023. Stephen had begun telling friends, family, and neighbors that he was on the verge of receiving a monumental family inheritance. According to Stephen, an uncle in Ireland had passed away, leaving him a staggering sum of $17 million. For Stephen, this unexpected fortune represented a miraculous opportunity to rebuild his life, reconnect with his sons, and finally establish his independence. He confided in Rebecca Mello that once the funds were secured, he intended to purchase an apartment for Ina to ensure she was financially stable, and then he would finally end their relationship and move to Texas to be near his children. This plan, born of a desire for a clean break, proved to be his death sentence. It is highly probable that Ina Kenoyer, living in close quarters and highly sensitive to changes in Stephen's behavior, overheard these conversations or discovered his intentions. The psychological motive of the crime became painfully clear. Ina was driven by a toxic combination of intense resentment, fear of abandonment, and extreme material greed. She believed that as Stephen S. common-law wife, she would have a legal claim to the $17 million if he were to pass away, whereas if he walked away from her, she would be left with nothing. The investigation uncovered a damning pattern of behavior by Ina during the days when Stephen was actively dying. Wesley Torgerson, Stephen S.'s former landlord, and his son, Shannon, provided critical testimony regarding the events of early September. On September 2nd, 2 days before the emergency call, Wesley had driven Stephen and Ina to the local airport, where Stephen believed he was scheduled to meet with a British attorney to finalize the inheritance paperwork. While waiting at the airport, the attorney failed to appear, and Stephen began to show severe physical symptoms of illness, collapsing and falling backward. Despite the clear indicators of a medical crisis, Ina actively discouraged any medical intervention. She insisted to the Torgersons that Stephen was merely suffering from heat stroke and that she would care for him at home. On the morning of September 3rd, a concerned Wesley Torgerson visited the apartment to check on Stephen. As he approached, he observed Ina standing outside the open door. Upon recognizing Wesley's vehicle, Ina reacted with visible alarm, quickly retreating inside and slamming the door shut. When Wesley confronted her and demanded to know Stephen's whereabouts, Ina lied, claiming that Stephen had gone to a local walk-in clinic. Wesley, driven by genuine concern, spent hours driving to every clinic in the small city, only to find no record of Stephen anywhere. When he returned to the apartment to confront Ina about her deception, she refused to let him inside, shutting the door in his face. It is now clear that while Wesley was being turned away, Stephen was lying inside the cluttered apartment, slowly dying as the ethylene glycol ravaged his internal organs, with Ina deliberately withholding life-saving medical care until the absolute last possible moment. Perhaps the most devastating and ironic revelation of the entire case emerged when federal investigators from the Department of the Treasury assisted local police in analyzing the source of the $17 million inheritance. Upon reviewing the email correspondence that Stephen had relied upon, detectives discovered that the entire inheritance was a complete and utter fabrication. The emails were sent from a generic address, utilizing inconsistent fonts and poorly formatted letterheads, claiming to represent a Swiss financial institution. The correspondence was part of a common international phishing scam operated by an individual using the pseudonym Richard, designed to trick vulnerable individuals into providing sensitive personal identification and bank details. The moment Ina Kenoyer replied to the email chain to inform the sender that Stephen had passed away, the email address was immediately deactivated and all subsequent messages were rejected. The $17 million did not exist. Stephen Riley had been poisoned and had ultimately died over absolutely nothing. The physical and behavioral evidence against Ina Kenoyer was overwhelming. Not only had she lied about Stephen's whereabouts to prevent him from receiving medical aid, but she had also made a critical, irreversible slip of the tongue. In the hours immediately following Stephen's admission to the hospital, before any chemical testing had even been initiated by the medical staff, Ina had told her neighbor Rebecca Mello that Stephen had been poisoned with antifreeze by his friends. This classic manifestation of guilty knowledge, revealing specific details about a crime that only the perpetrator could know, sealed her fate. When confronted by detectives with these massive contradictions during her interrogation, Ina's facade of grief crumbled into display of explosive anger and defensive evasion before she ultimately demanded a legal representative. On October 30th, 2023, armed with a comprehensive array of circumstantial and physical evidence, the Minot Police Department arrested Ina Kenoyer and charged her with Class AA felony murder. Facing the prospect of a high-profile trial where the state would present a seamless timeline of her calculated greed and deliberate neglect, Ina and her legal counsel ultimately elected to file a motion for a change of plea. In May of 2024, she entered a plea of guilty to the murder of Stephen Riley. She was subsequently sentenced to serve 25 years in a state correctional facility, followed by 10 years of active probation. This tragic case offers profound insights into the psychological motives that drive individuals to commit unspeakable acts, as well as the societal vulnerabilities that allow such crimes to occur. At its core, the crime was fueled by the illusion of wealth. In a modern society where financial security is heavily equated with personal worth, the promise of sudden life-changing money can easily distort a person's moral compass. This vulnerability is severely amplified in individuals who have experienced chronic instability, poverty, and trauma. For both Stephen and Ina, the prospect of $17 million was a powerful drug that altered their perceptions of reality. Stephen saw it as freedom. Ina saw it as a threat to her survival and a chance to secure her own future at any cost. To prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future, communities must foster a deeper awareness of the dangers of digital financial scams. Had there been a greater level of skepticism or a support system to verify the legitimacy of the inheritance claims, Stephen might have realized the deception before it triggered a fatal domestic conflict. Furthermore, this case highlights the critical importance of paying attention to the behavioral warning signs of domestic control and isolation. When an individual actively prevents friends and neighbors from contacting a sick person, it must always be treated as a matter of immediate concern. For law enforcement agencies, the successful resolution of this case underscores several highly effective investigative strategies that can expedite the capture of perpetrators in complex poisoning cases. First, the collaboration between medical professionals and forensic investigators is paramount. Without the clinical intuition of the intensive care unit physician who suggested the ethylene glycol test, the crime might have gone completely undetected, registered simply as a natural death. Second, the careful documentation of initial statements and subsequent timelines is a powerful tool. By noting the exact timing of Ina's statements regarding antifreeze, detectives were able to establish guilty knowledge, exposing the fallacy of her innocence. Finally, the meticulous gathering of digital evidence and physical scene analysis remains the cornerstone of modern justice. Ultimately, the story of Stephen Riley is a poignant reminder that the pursuit of illusionary wealth can destroy real lives, and that true justice relies on the quiet, methodical dedication of those committed to uncovering the truth.